This isn't a war that's going to end very quickly.
Yeah.
In a sense that this is a war against. Right now, we're in the phase of fighting Hamas's conventional forces, the battalions that it's built up, the same forces that we saw invading Israel on October 7th. And the remaining battalions are located in the town of Rafah, where the fight is now going on. But once they're defeated, we're still going to have to deal with a terror army of cells of terrorists who burrow underground in the 400 miles of subterranean tunnels that Hamas built, and who right now still exert civilian control over the population because of the humanitarian aid that they continue to control the distribution of. So this isn't going to end with Rafah. What will likely end is the high intensity, tank battles with a lot of the RPGs that we're seeing and the anti-tank weapons that are being used against our forces.
Yeah.
Things like that will probably shift to less high intensity conflict. So it's going to take a while, but the Biden administration is doing its best to prolong the conflict by undermining Israel on micro-tactical issues to gum up the works and make it almost impossible for our forces to be able to advance towards the goal of destroying Hamas's forces. So absolutely, the United States is playing a wholly negative role in this. But amazingly, it's amazing that we've gotten this far with the kind of American pressure and coercion that we've been suffering from since the outset.
It seems to me, Carol, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. It seems like it's a pro-Iranian, pro-Palestinian policy coming from the White House.
It is. It is because, look, the Biden administration is sort of the continuation from an ideological and policy perspective of the Obama administration.
Yeah,
There's really no distinction. It's the same people who are who are responsible for Middle East policy that were responsible under Obama. Tony Blinken was Obama's deputy secretary of state, and everybody there were senior officials, less senior, but senior officials in the Obama administration. And as a consequence, they're getting Obama's policy trajectory. So as Ben Rhodes, Obama's director of communications, explained in an interview with the New York Times back in 2013, 2014, he said that the main focus was going to be Iran in the second term. And it was the main focus of Biden and the Democratic Party, really, since 2017 when Trump came into office. And it was very clear that they were going to enact it when they came into office if they won. And that policy vis-a-vis Iran and its terror proxies is to seek the realignment of America in the Middle East away from its traditional Sunni Arab allies led by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and its alliance with Israel, so that the realignment of America away from Israel and the Sunnis towards the Shiites, towards Iran, was the thrust of Obama's foreign policy in his second term, and now it's the thrust of Biden's policy, and it has been since day one.
Obama's third term.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as you want to call it, but yes, it's the same policy, it's the same people. And so Iran is an imperial power, and it asserts its regional power as an imperial power through the terror armies that it has built and that it controls. And they, in turn, have swallowed a significant number of countries in the region. So the first one, obviously, is Lebanon, which is controlled by Hezbollah, which controls the government, controls the army, controls the banking, controls all aspects of life in Lebanon, but it doesn't say it. So you pretend that there is an independent force called the Government of Lebanon or the Lebanese Armed Forces, which are armed and trained and by the United States, and even the United States pays them, I think, illegally, the salaries of the soldiers and officers in the Lebanese Armed Forces, sometimes in cash.
Wow.
And so, the United States sees the Lebanese Armed Forces as their proxy, except that their proxy is controlled by Hezbollah. So that's Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have, as well, in Iraq, the government of Iraq, and it's all kind of controlled by Iran because the Iranian manned militias in Iraq and controlled are the most powerful military forces in the country. And as a result, if you want to survive in office, if you want to survive in life, you make deals with them. So that's Iraq, and it's in Syria through the through the Bashar Assad administration. Their regime is completely dependent on Iran. So they're an Iranian puppet. So that's how Iran exerts power, is that it formed what it calls a ring of fire around Israel, whose purpose is to annihilate the Jewish state. It operates through its proxies, but because the Biden administration, like the Obama administration, seeks the realignment of the United States towards Iran and away from its traditional allies, it views Iran's proxies as what Obama referred to as equities. But they're essentially, the United States accepts them as legitimate forces because they're Iranian, and you want to realign the United States towards Iran, and that's why the United States has taken no action against Hezbollah. It's taking no action against Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, which is a Muslim Brotherhood organization that's funded by Qatar, and of course the Shiite militias in Iraq. So the United States under Biden is not, and the Houthis, which are an Iranian proxy force and regime in Yemen. So the United States won't take any action to overthrow any of these regimes or destroy any of these terror armies, and it doesn't want Israel to, because it wants to cut a deal with Iran. So instead, what the United States says to Israel, like it said to Saudi Arabia when it was at war with the Houthis, is you can intercept missiles en route. We'll help you with, in Saudi's case, with our Patriot missiles, or in Israel by supplying you with Iron Dome missiles that we insisted on manufacturing in America rather than allowing you to manufacture them in Israel. And we'll allow you to defend yourself, to intercept missiles en route, but you're not allowed to go on offense. You're not allowed to defeat Iran. You're not allowed to defeat Iran's proxies. And that's what we're seeing playing out in Gaza. That's what we're seeing playing out in Lebanon, and obviously that's what we see playing out with Iran.
So I'm listening to you here, and it really looks like Israel is alone here. And then just a couple of days ago, when during our trip, we heard that the war cabinet was dissolved. And how's that going to play out in the what's going to happen?
Nothing. I mean, the war cabinet was a creation of what was called the National Emergency Government when left-wing leader Benny Gantz, the former defense minister, former IDF chief of staff, agreed to bring his faction in the Knesset into the government to try to work with the government in the beginning of the war after October 7th. I think they joined on the 11th. And their condition for joining was that the day-to-day leadership of the war would move from the National Security Cabinet in Israel, which is a constitutive body that's responsible for national security decision-making in Israel, to this war cabinet that had 3 voting members: Netanyahu, the prime minister; Yoav Gallant, the defense minister; and Benny Gantz as a minister with that portfolio. But it was only in order to keep him in the government or bring him into the government that they agreed to do this. And once he left, there was no reason to retain this body, which is basically not even statutory.
So it's it. They're going to form another one, or they're just...
No, I mean, the decision-making is going to redound back to, or be done the way that it was done before Gantz came into
How much pressure is Bibi getting right now from his own government?
From the government? I mean, he's getting an enormous amount of pressure. Nobody has the amount of pressure on him that Prime Minister Netanyahu has on him, because he gets enormous pressure from all quarters. He gets it from America. He gets it from Europe. He gets it from international bodies like the UN and they're the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court. He gets it from everywhere. And then at home, we have a restive, increasingly violent and anarchistic political opposition that is calling for the violent overthrow of the government if they're not able to do it through parliamentary means. So he's got a lot of pressure on him, and plus his own constituents who are beginning to feel like they're not sure what's happening, and so they need to be reassured. It's very difficult. It's a very, very difficult situation that Israel is in, and that he, as the leader of Israel, determined to fight to victory when when everybody around him is saying, let's quit.
And you mentioned that this was going to be a long haul war,
Right.
and that makes sense. What happens in Gaza when when Hamas is completely destroyed, whenever that day comes, how is the restructuring of the government of Gaza? Are they going to? Is Israel going to let Palestinians rule again, or is it going to be changed? Do they have a choice?
It depends on when the day after, as they call it, comes to be. I mean, the Biden administration is doing everything that it can to preserve Hamas's regime, which is why they're interfering with all of Israel's activities in order to prevent Israel from seizing significant permanent control over Gaza by, signing with these crazy Hamas demands that we remove our forces from Gaza when we can't. And, really the only way to denazify Gaza, I mean, you have to understand that the vast majority of the people in Gaza, just like the vast majority of the people in Judea and Samaria, support October 7th and support the atrocities that were carried out that day, and support in overwhelming numbers of physical annihilation of Israel and the Jewish people. So you can't just walk away from that. Unfortunately, I mean, we tried, in 2005 when we picked up we expelled forcibly all of our citizens who were living in Gaza. We destroyed 24 flourishing communities of Israelis in Judea, in Gaza. And we removed all of our military forces there because we were led by people who had the insane notion that if you just pick up your marbles and go home and lock the door behind you, that they would leave us alone, which of course, as we saw, was never true.
Right. No.
So we have to stay there and we have to be in charge because these people can't be allowed to carry guns. They can't be allowed to have the power to do anything because every amount of firepower, every amount of regime power that they receive, they use just for, to execute their one goal, which is to annihilate Jews, to kill as many Jews as possible, to destroy the state of Israel. So they can't be allowed to remain in power in any way, shape, or form. And that requires a long-term Israeli security presence in Gaza, total control from a security perspective. And I think the vast majority of Israelis recognize we also need to rebuild our military government in Gaza and just take over until we can significantly denazify that society.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because you mentioned mindset, that you've written articles on the general staff and the failure of them not heeding the warnings that were given to them prior to October 7th. There seemed to be, I don't know what you want to call it, Caroline, an arrogance that the general staff said they can never do this. That's not, they were just dismissing the reports being given to them.
Right.
Has that mindset changed among the general staff? Or are we still dealing with that same mindset?
We're very much still in the same mindset with our military leaders. There's a real problem that we're experiencing in fighting this war, which is that you basically have this level of leadership that's on the top. You have the prime minister, and then you have this layer of senior bureaucratic personnel and the general staff of the army. And then below that, you have the entire people of Israel, and the public is with Netanyahu and the determination to win. But you have this intermediate level that has a different vision of what Israel should be and of where Israel should go and of how we should be organizing ourselves both as a society and as a nation at war. And so, they're not advancing the same goals that the government has set out and that the people demand, which is total victory in this war.
Yeah.
And it's a problem but I think both the inertial shift is with the public and with the leadership, and more importantly, I mean, they don't have the ability to say that we know and you don't anymore. After the calamity of October 7th, their standing in the public is much weaker than it was on October 6th. So I think that, it's taking time to play out, but things are playing out.
So as far as the general staff is concerned, I think you've written several articles or something about this, that they seem to be doing the bidding of the Biden administration and seem to be undermining Netanyahu or even the public polls.
Right.
I mean, they seem to be going against the tide. is this an ideology among them? A leftist ideology? I don't know. What? Because it's a national security threat.
Yes, it is.
I mean, you got people that want to kill you.
Right.
I just can't get my mind wrapped around their thinking.
So I was in the Army during the height of the so-called peace process with the PLO, and I was brought into the Ministry of Defense to the unit that was responsible for the civil governance in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. And my commander, who was a major general, was asked by Yitzhak Rabin, who was the prime minister then, to lead negotiations on civil affairs, so all non-military issues with the PLO. And another general named Uzi Dayan was responsible for the military negotiations with the transfer of security power to the Palestinian Authority that we were establishing. And so I saw there, so I was I was a core member of Israel's negotiating team during those times. I wrote a lot of the agreements, and as a captain. And junior officers are very important.
Okay.
And so the thing is that I saw with my own eyes the politicization of the general staff of the army because, Rabin saw that Peres had negotiated behind his back, Shimon Peres, the then foreign minister, and they were rivals. The original deal with the PLO in Oslo, Norway, it's been known as the Oslo deal ever since. And he was using these outside experts, researchers, to run this sort of off-records negotiation. And they came up with a really horrible agreement that didn't protect any of Israel's national interests. And then they presented it to Rabin as a fait accompli. And from a political perspective, Rabin wasn't able to kill it when it was young, and so he embraced it, but he thought that the way to mitigate the damage that would be caused by the implementation of this agreement was to transfer the actual negotiations to people that he thought would be his loyalists, and that's the army, because he was the defense minister and the former chief of staff of the IDF. And they were loyal to him, but the problem is that Oslo itself is a corrosive, corrupting process because it takes as an axiom, as its foundational axiom, that the architects of global terrorism, people who are genocidal anti-Semites, that they are Israel's partner in peace, and that they're the ones who are going to fight terrorism for us. So we were going to be able to subcontract out our fight against terrorism to terrorists, that they were going to do it better than we did because they knew these people and they knew how they operated, and they had, and the whole thing might have worked if the PLO had been telling the truth, if Yasser Arafat really had turned over a new leaf and that he wanted to no longer be a terrorist and he wanted to make peace with Israel. So, of course, that wasn't true.
Right.
Of course, he was lying. Of course, the whole thing was a Trojan horse, as they themselves attested. And we got stuck. The problem was that the minute that you bring in the general staff to a thing, you transform it into an institutional interest of the IDF for it to actually work. And so when you see the politicization in real time unfolding, you realize that what you're doing is you're changing the institutional DNA of the Israel Defense Force from a force that's committed to defeating Israel's enemies to a force that thinks that, there is no military solution to a military problem, which is terrorism. And of course, there's only a military solution to terrorism. There's no other solution to terrorism. First, you have to take away all of their weapons. You have to kill all of their gunmen. You have to, arrest thousands of people and deport them so that they can't hurt you anymore. And then you can talk to the people who remain. But until you've actually utterly defeated them to the point where they can't pick up their heads anymore, you can't sit down and negotiate. And the problem is that's not what happened to the PLO. We saved them from near death that they experienced after the Gulf War, when all of the Arab countries stopped supporting them, and then they were all begging the Israelis for peace, but it was all a lie. It was just a way to rebuild themselves so that they would be able to carry on their fight. They only have one fight. They're a one-trick pony. All they want to do is kill Jews. And we gave them the tools to do it because we were led by gullible, stupid, narcissistic men who were egomaniacs and were sure that they knew better than everybody else's common sense what was in Israel's interest. But once you change the DNA of an organization, it's very difficult to change it because then they have an institutional interest in promotion and in a hierarchy to cling to the new DNA in order to advance. And that's really what we've seen over the past generation of IDF leadership since I left.
Man.
Yeah. So in the midst of all this, we keep hearing over and over from different angles, two-state solution, two-state solution. The only way is a two-state solution. And you wrote a book, The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East.
Right.
So for the benefit of our audience, explain what you mean by the Israeli solution, one-state solution.
Yeah, but first you have to realize that you can't. A two-state solution is just a euphemism for the final solution, for the destruction of Israel, because you can't form a Palestinian state that will live side by side with Israel in an area that Israel requires for its national survival, and also because it's our homeland. It's the cradle of Jewish civilization, is where we're sitting right now in my home in Judea, and Judea and Samaria, the birthplace of the Jewish people, are now demonized as some sort of ancestral land of another people whose history began around 1964 with the establishment of the PLO. So, you're talking about not just a rewriting of history and a co-optation of Israel's history to people who want to kill all the Jews. It's that, first of all, from a military perspective, there's no way that Tel Aviv can exist without Bukhara. You can't defend central Israel without having the eastern frontier of the land of Israel up to the Jordan River. There's no way to block, and as we saw on October 7th, they do want to invade. There's no way to block invading Arab forces from coming in from the east if you're not in control of the Jordan Rift Valley.
Yeah, right.
There's just no way. And so that's from a military perspective. And from a national perspective, there's no way to understand why we're located here in the land of Israel if we're giving up our sovereignty over Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing here? If we're willing to give up the Temple Mount in Gaza, in Jerusalem, then there's no point in having a Jewish state, because the only reason that we're here instead of in San Francisco is because of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So at its heart, the two-state solution, as it's called, is about forcing the Jews to renounce our history, our ancestral rights, and our military imperatives for survival in the name of peace with a terrorist organization, one of many, right, with terrorists whose sole motivating principle as a society is the annihilation of this country. So, it's, and everybody likes to talk about peace. There's never been a day of peace. The Palestinians have never implemented any part of the negotiation except the gimme part.
Sure.
Give me this, give me land, give me money, give me international recognition, give me this, give me that. But anything that they have to give themselves, they've breached every single clause of every single one of the annexes of the agreement from day one. It's all a lie. And so, obviously, under the circumstances, you can't have a Palestinian state. And many Israelis who didn't realize that on October 6th certainly recognized that on October 7th, to the point where today 80% of Israeli Jews oppose it. 70% of Israelis overall oppose it. So there's no domestic constituency beyond the radical left for supporting a Palestinian statehood, and here's the Biden administration trying to shove it down our throat. Now, my book, The One-State Solution, The Israeli Solution, first of all, the only way that we can survive is if we apply sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. And the question of what to do with the Arabs who live there is a policy question. It's not an existential question. From an existential perspective, there's literally no way for Israel to survive over time without full control over Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley. There's none.
Right.
But second of all, when I wrote the book, it was during the Arab Spring, and the Arabs, out of fear from the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Iran, the Arabs here, the Israeli Arabs, not the Palestinian Arabs, the Arabs who actually have Israeli citizenship, began seizing onto their Israeli citizenship and their identity as Israelis, like a port in the storm. We were the safest port in the storm. And as the civil war and the genocide of Sunnis was raging in Syria, and Egypt was being, overthrown, the Mubarak regime, and replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis.
Mm-hmm.
This was very, very terrifying for Israeli Arabs. And so you had a trend beginning of integration of Israeli Arabs into Israeli society that manifested itself in conscription to the army. They don't have mandatory conscription. They were volunteering, national service, sending children to Hebrew language schools rather than Arabic language schools. So I saw this as a possibility that if over time, perhaps the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria would also want to integrate into Israeli society. But then we saw sort of a counter-revolution happening with the rise of Iran, particularly because of Obama and then Biden, where the impulse to integrate and to embrace Zionism, essentially the Jewish state, and accept Israel as a Jewish state, among Israeli Arabs was reversed, and they became increasingly radicalized. And so, over the intervening decades since I wrote the book, when I wrote the book, I thought that it would be possible to naturalize the Palestinians over time. But in the intervening decades since I wrote it in 2013, and it came out in 2014, I sort of realized that that's not a realistic scenario. And so what we really have to do is annex the areas and allow them to have autonomous self-governments in their areas, and
But that's what you tried with Gaza.
Right.
no, but we didn't, because in Gaza we left.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
ran away from Gaza. We gave the Palestinians in Gaza control over the international border, and so that's the difference between then and here.
Okay.
Caroline, help our audience understand the existential threat that's in the north with Hezbollah. And I think the stats or something are like 150 missiles are aimed at
150,000.
Yeah, sorry, 150,000 are aimed at Israel. And you've got a displacement of the population of about 85,000 or something in that neighborhood. Israel's going to have to do something about that. And it seems like the Biden administration is telling them, hey, lay low, don't do anything. But they can't. We just talked to IDF guys. They're moving up north.
Right.
Explain our audience, help them understand the dynamics of what's happening up there.
So Hezbollah is, as I mentioned earlier, it's an Iranian organization. The Iranians actually founded Hezbollah from another Shiite militia called Amal in 1982. And the precursor to Hezbollah and Hezbollah, they were sort of merged, were the ones who carried out the Marine barracks bombing in 1983 that killed 241 Marines. That was the largest terrorist attack against Americans before 9/11. And Hezbollah is basically Iran's foreign legion. They're totally they're controlled, but they're so powerful that they're basically partners with Iran in carrying out the revolutionary goal of the Iranian regime, which is, among other things, to annihilate Israel and to wage war against the West. So a lot of the bombings abroad have also been carried out by Hezbollah, along with the Revolutionary Guards of Iran. And the thing about it is that people don't realize that they're essentially a division of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. They're not really a separate and distinct organization, but the difference between them and the normal Revolutionary Guards is that the Revolutionary Guards controls Iran.
Okay.
And Hezbollah controls Lebanon. So they're a political force. They're the largest party, I believe, in the Lebanese parliament. Okay. They're the most powerful faction. The reason there's no permanent government in Lebanon is because Hezbollah won't permit it. And Hezbollah controls all executive power in Lebanon. So it's not just a terror army that operates in somebody else's country. They've swallowed Lebanon. Since 2005, when they killed the president Hariri, they've effectively controlled Lebanon. And if anybody had any doubt about it, they carried out another coup in 2008 when they seized control over the Beirut airport. So Beirut airport is a Hezbollah airport. It's an Iranian airport. It's controlled by Iran completely through Hezbollah. So when you understand that, you understand that you're not just dealing with a small problem. You're dealing with a huge problem.
Sure.
So basically a sovereign terror. Lebanon is it's not really a country, it's an optical illusion.
Huh.
It's Iran's forward operating base against Israel that happens to have 5.5 million civilians who live on base. Okay, but that's really how you have to look at Lebanon. If you look at it as a country, then you miss the essential nature of what you're looking at. And so that's one of the reasons, a very basic reason that Lebanon and Hezbollah are such a difficult problem, because the United States likes to tell us that the problem in Gaza isn't the Palestinians, it's Hamas, but the Palestinians overwhelmingly support Hamas.
Right.
So it's not true. And you try to make a distinction between like Hamas terrorists just fell from the sky and took over Gaza. That's not true.
Right.
In Lebanon, it's a little bit more complicated, because there are a lot of people in Lebanon that don't support Hezbollah. It's just that they can't do anything about it.
Right.
So, yeah, they're suffering, but it's not Israel's fault.
Right.
You know, that they couldn't make a go of it with their country. I mean, you know, sorry.
Yeah.
But the point is that Hezbollah controls Lebanon, and Hezbollah has, like you said, an enormous rocket missile, now drone arsenal. They have. I wouldn't say that Israel any longer has total control over the skies because of their advanced drone arsenal. You know, when you so yeah, we're facing, and I mean, and a lot of it is because Iran itself isn't a standalone country anymore. It's part of a much larger complex, which includes China and it includes Russia and North Korea, and they're all operating as one alliance. So it's a much more difficult threat. And when we begin, we're going to have to begin a more intensified war against Hezbollah, you know, that in all likelihood we'll also face incoming missiles from Iran, as we did on the night of April 13th, 14th. So, it's a very dangerous thing. But the people that you were speaking to in the army are absolutely correct. You know, what Hezbollah is doing now with shooting all the rockets and missiles and drones into northern Israel is that they're essentially asserting effective operational control over northern Israel. Like, you can't, if you live in Margaliot, which is a border community along the border with Lebanon, you actually can't be in your house. Like, you can't, if you're in your house, as soon as you leave your house, then you can be shot because you're exposed to Hezbollah. And it's not just in Margaliot or in Kiryat Shmona, you know, it's much further down. Where they have eyes on the whole thing, and they have the capacity to kill you with precision missiles and rockets at will. So that's effective operational control, which is why we have the refugee problem, which is why 80,000 Israelis had to be displaced from their homes, and they've been living in hotels since October. So obviously this isn't a status quo that's sustainable from an Israeli perspective, because if we sustain it, then we no longer have northern Israel. So, and there's no deal that Hezbollah is going to cut with Israel that's going to allow the residents of the north to come home.
Right.
So that means that the only way to bring them home is by fighting them.
Yeah.
And that does put us at loggerheads with the United States, which wants to protect Iran's equities. It doesn't want Israel to defeat Hezbollah because and it does. Just like, you know, when Israel was attacked with 300 Iranian projectiles on the night of April 13th, 14th, and we were able to intercept the vast majority of them. President Biden said something extraordinary to Israel. He was trying to block us at all costs from retaliating against Iran or retaliating in any way that was actually going to cause them damage. And he said, take a win. Take a win, because we were able to intercept 99%. That night cost us $1 billion shekels to the interception of those. And it cost them what, you know, a couple, maybe $20 million, maybe 30. This isn't, you can't have this kind of situation, not from an economic perspective, not from a national perspective. And obviously the thing to do on April 15th was attack Iran's nuclear installations, its oil and gas terminals, and its regime installations with Israel's own missiles. But the United States blocked us from doing that. And they control the airspace between Israel and Iran, or a significant portion of it, through CENTCOM. So they can interfere with Israel's ability to carry out such missions.
Wow.
Well, you kind of answered the question a little bit, but I have this weird theory about Hezbollah, because we're looking in the news that they shoot some missiles a little bit here, a little bit there, and it doesn't look like there's any. It's serious, but it's not as serious as a full-blown war. And it's almost like they're trying to get Israel to deplete their arsenal, knowing that at some point Israel will not be getting weapons from the U.S., and then there will be a perfect time to go on full against Israel. Does that make any sense?
There was a news report that came out from, I think, the Prime Minister's office yesterday. It was explaining the what Prime Minister Netanyahu was talking about Secretary of State Blinken about when Blinken visited Israel for the umpteenth time last week. And the statement said essentially that Netanyahu demanded that the United States stop embargoing arms to Israel. They've been slow walking. They keep telling the American people that they're giving Israel arms. Biden made a big deal about signing into law, a very major military aid package to Israel last month, I think, last month. And then he immediately said, we're not going to be selling or not going to be transferring arms that have already been approved for the Air Force, precision-guided 2,000-pound bombs. And so in the conversation that took place last week between Netanyahu and Blinken, he told the Secretary of State that that the chances of war and the chances of the war getting much worse and expanding are increased to a very steep degree because of the United States not providing the required weapons, because it empowers Hezbollah along the lines of what you're saying. So that if Hezbollah is now marking time, figuring we'll shoot 200 missiles one day into Israel, 100 another day, give them a respite for 3 days, and then shoot them with 500 tomorrow, which is very likely, then Israel is going to expend all of its defensive missiles.
Right.
And then the United States won't resupply them because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her fellow squad members are going to sit on it, place a hold on it or whatever, and their comrades at the State Department are going to block it, or in the National Security Council, then that's their war plan. They want to exactly exhaust Israel. So Blinken reportedly said that he was going to end the arms embargo and reinstate weapons. We'll see. But absolutely, I think that, crazy as it sounds, the force that has had the most destabilizing impact here has been the Biden administration. The force most responsible for the prolongation and the escalation of the war against Israel is Biden and his administration, because when the United States isn't standing with Israel, it opens the floodgates for everybody else to come and assault. I think a lot of the anti-Semitism that you've been seeing throughout the West is because President Biden refuses to condemn anti-Semitism without condemning Islamophobia, even though there is no Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism is making life unlivable for Jews throughout the Western world today. So, the problem is that if the Biden administration's refusal to stand with Israel absolutely emboldens Israel's enemies, and it absolutely sends a signal that Israel is no longer a viable state, because the United States doesn't want it to defeat enemies that are waging a war of annihilation against the Jewish state. So I think that whether it's Hezbollah in the north or Hamas in the south or Iran to the east, what we're seeing is the direct consequence of an American policy that is directed towards realigning the United States away from its position as the head of the free world by standing with the people who support America and stand with America, to becoming something else that wants to stand in alliance with the most dangerous, violent, threatening, hateful, anti-American forces on God's green earth. That's what we're seeing now. And when you stand with evil, evil flourishes.
Yes. Yeah. Please tell me this one thing, Caroline. Is Israel starting to manufacture their own weapons and not have to rely on the United States?
We are, we are, and you're going to see a lot more of that. But yes, we are. I mean, our son is in an engineering battalion in Gaza, and he's in reserves. And so the first time he was called up, he was fighting in northern Gaza and in Khan Yunis, and then he was allowed to go home for a month or two, and then he was called back to Rafah. And he told me when he went back into Rafah, he said, "Caroline, you'd be really happy." He said, "You'll be really happy to know that the TNT that we used in the previous round was made in America, and the stuff we're using now, and the landmines are all made in Israel." So
Good.
So yeah, so
I'm into that.
Changing a lot of the things, so that definitely made me happy.
Yeah,
And
good.
but yeah, we're doing a lot of the building ourselves. But the thing is that the United States, the Obama administration cultivated dependence by Israel, but the way that they structured the memorandum of understanding relating to American military assistance to Israel back in 2015-16, which required we had used some of the money traditionally for our domestic industries, and then he required us to shut down all of our domestic industries and purchase everything in the United States, which sounds right from an American perspective. Obviously, if you're
Sure.
giving the money, you want it to be used in the industries. And it would have made sense for Israel to either walk away from the aid at the time, which is what I advocated, or maintain the aid, but at the same time recognize that that's one thing, and then we have to maintain and expand our domestic industries
Right.
regardless, and we can do it
Right.
for export, we can do it for whatever we want.
Right.
But the same idiotic generals who don't understand strategic realities are the ones who said, "Oh, we don't have to produce," so we shut down a lot of plants
Oh,
that were producing tank and artillery shells and bullets, basic tools of war, and increasingly reliant on the United States. That's true with the Iron Dome missiles as well. I mean, we created the technology. There's no reason for it to be produced in the United States and not here. So we're also increasing our production of the
Good.
defensive missiles.
Amen. Amen. Well, we've taken too much of your time, but thank you for the
Thank you.
insight, man. You got it lined out, man.
Thank you.
So, guys, I want to tell you this. You need to read her articles. You need to watch her videos that she does. I do it every week to stay up on things because
JNS.
it'll keep you up on what's going on here in Israel. And you're at JNS.
Right, JNS.org.
Yeah.
And they can get where I'm the senior editor, and they can also get my stuff at my own website, CarolineGlick.com, spelled Caroline. And yeah, JNS.org and CarolineGlick.com. And follow me on Twitter. I'm always there.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much,
Thank
Caroline.
you, Olivia. Thank you,
Awesome.
Brandon. Thank you both.
God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.
Shalom.